The Catholic channel Sirius XM 129 presents Sounds from the Spires with Dr. Jennifer Pasqual, music director of St. Patrick's Cathedral.
And you're listening to Sounds from the Spires on the Catholic channel of Sirius XM 129. And today we have a very special guest, JJ Mitchell, who is right now, are you in Arlington, Virginia right now, JJ?
I am in Houston, Texas.
You're in Houston, Texas now, okay.
Yes.
You've been all over the place because you were at Notre Dame University when I last saw you. And then you went to France to do some glorious training and experience over there. And then the pandemic hit and then you had to come back home. And then now you're in Houston. What are you doing in Houston?
Right. So I started my DMA, which is a doctorate in musical arts. And for musicians, this is our PhD essentially. Most PhD programs in certain fields, you do a 5-year haul in your field, but for music, we like to split it. So you do a 2-year master's degree, which I completed, as you said, at the University of Notre Dame. And you do then 3 years of doctoral level work. And typically that's done at another school, though some people choose to stay in the same place. So I've chosen to come to the University of Houston to do my 3-year DMA.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And JJ, of course, is an organist, church musician, spectacular player, and a good person and great in the field. So it's really great to have him here today. During this pandemic still, we're doing this via Zoom. So even though our listeners can't see you, I can see you. So it's good to see you. And it's actually great to be able to communicate like this where we can actually see each other. And a lot of people have been saying that.
It's really splendid, especially to people that I met internationally last year. I've been able to keep in touch with as well, thanks to this kind of technology. And that's been really helpful. Yeah.
And so now how long have you been in Houston since you came back from France then?
So I moved to Houston at the end of August. So I've been here for about a month, give or take. And I also would like to mention too that one of the reasons I chose to move to Houston, because there's of course the talk of the risk of moving during a pandemic, as well as at the time, Houston was a hot spot when I came down here. I chose to move to the University of Houston, not just for the university, for the starting of school, because most of that can be done online. I chose to move down here because I actually have started 2 church jobs, one of which is I'm now the organ scholar of Christ Church Cathedral here in Texas, and the other one is St. Philip Presbyterian Church. The pandemic has created a rather unusual situation for me where, because there are no choirs meeting, I can juggle 2 church jobs at once. Yes. Typically that would not be the case because you have conflicting rehearsals, you have conflicting Sunday mornings, but I've actually been very fortunate and very lucky to be in the situation I am now. So those jobs required me to be here. Right.
Now, are those jobs both holding in-person services or are things online right now?
We are working towards getting slowly and safely back into in-person, but to answer your question, it's almost entirely online at this point.
Wow. So you have to record ahead of time, or are you broadcasting live?
The cathedral will broadcast live. Actually, both of the churches will broadcast live. My job at St. Philip Presbyterian is interesting because as far as I am concerned, or as far as I know rather, it is the only church in Houston that is doing a daily service with organ. And they are very diligent about this. And so I'm the Wednesday, Thursday guy at St. Philip. And so every morning we have a liturgy, which I just came back from actually right before the recording of this interview. And it's very brief, but they always have organ at the beginning and a hymn at the end. And at the cathedral, that requires me to be there more Sundays than not. And that, of course, is a much more involved liturgy.
Yeah. And what are the instruments like at those 2 places? The cathedral?
Very different. So St. Philip has got an organ built by Paul Fritz, who's an organ builder from Washington State. And he specializes in pipe organs that are based on North German antiquity. So this is the type of organ that would have been familiar to Dietrich Buxtehude, for example, and the North German Baroque organ composers. And he doesn't build copies, but he builds in that style. And he's building in a rather lively acoustic in St. Philip. And it's a 3-manual organ, and it's really magnificent. I love it. It's fantastic. And the other organ, I'm also very lucky. I like that one too. Very different. Built by the Aeolian Skinner Company back in the early part of the 20th century. Most recently, revoiced by Nicholas and Simpson organ builders out of Little Rock, Arkansas. And that organ is a fantastic choral accompaniment instrument, and you can get a wide variety of dynamic sound from it. It can be so raucous and loud that you need some earplugs, and it can be so quiet that you're holding your ear towards the pipes. Can I hear it? Can I hear it?
Yeah.
And just very, very large instrument as well. 4 manuals and just an infinite, seemingly infinite, at least, amount of stops on there. So
yeah,
it'd be great.
Well, good for you. That's a good balance of the Baroque and early instrument repertoire and then romantic stuff.
One of the major draws for coming to the University of Houston actually was the fact that because we are in this great big city, we have access to so many different pipe organs. And these pipe organs are really magnificent, and we're not just limited to what's on campus here. Even though the organs on campus, we have a great organ built by von Beckerath, who was a German organ builder, and that organ's from 1974, and it sits in a beautiful organ hall. But it's just really nice to know that if you want a change of scene, you can leave campus here and you have access to the Fritz, you have access to the Alien Skinner at the Cathedral, and you have access to so many other great instruments. The Catholic Cathedral here has a great posse instrument,
yes,
which I've only been here a month. I've got to get over there sometime soon.
right.
And just the list goes on and on. It's endless possibilities, and it's really exciting to be here.
Wow. Is that von Beckerath very heavy action like his other instruments?
Yeah, so the von Beckerath instrument is built in such a way where when you put keyboards coupled together, so like when you're grouping different sounds, it can be very heavy to play. The keyboards actually like gain weight more or less.
Yeah.
And so you have to be pretty good with your technique, that you're staying nice and loose and you're dropping your arm weight in such a way where you're using really expert technique, because if not, then you're going to build tension, and you can feel it in your wrist if you're building the tension, which is not good, but it's good because it keeps you on your toes as a student.
Right.
So
yeah,
good teaching instrument.
For those who aren't organists, you have to lift weights practically to play these instruments. They're pretty stiff.
Yeah.
Who are you studying with, JJ?
I study with Daryl Robinson here. And he's also my boss at the Cathedral, which is very exciting. And so I'm getting him on both ends there at school and at work. And then at St. Philip, I work with Randall Swanson and also with Matthew Durst, who is a very fine organist himself.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And as well here, I've got the Moore School of Music at the University of Houston has a really fantastic faculty, and I'm really lucky to work with them. Yeah.
Good for you. You're working with some great people. And I remember when I first met you, you were working with Rick Gabala, and you just keep doing great things. And you're so young, you have so far to go yet. And you're already doing some wonderful things. So good for you.
Thank you.
And you were in France for just a short time. I'm sad that you had to cut that short, but of course you had to be safe and come back home. What was that like, doing some studies and getting some experience in France?
So I am at the stage where at the end of my master's degree, I wanted to go through and get the doctorate, but I wasn't sold at the end of my master's for a number of reasons that finishing the master's and going straight into the doctorate was the right choice. Mm. And I was thinking about what I would like to do with my life before I went into my doctorate. And it seemed as though if I were to land a job here in the United States, you might get cushy, comfortable, and you might not want to leave. And then life kind of happens. And those are the sort of people who might not finish their doctorate necessarily, or get to their doctorate study at all, is what I'm trying to say. Conversely, I didn't want to go straight in on a fear of burning out academically. And I felt like I needed a change, like I needed to broaden my horizon, do something with my life that was going to provide me with a different lens, so to speak, on the field, on what it is. I mean, even beyond the field, what it is to live on our planet and to experience a different culture. And so I really wanted to study internationally, and I worked hard to get some scholarships and some grants. And I was also privileged because I went to the University of Notre Dame and I went to Westminster Choir College as well, that these were two institutions that provided enough scholarship for me. Notre Dame, of course, being a full tuition scholarship, that I actually was able to fund enough for myself to do this. And as well, as this was, of course, compounded, as I said, by things that I was applying for to help fund this trip. And some things I won, some things I did not win, but still I was very lucky to be able to pull off moving to France in the first place and living there. And my goal there was to study at the Conservatoire and receive what is called a Certificat en Perfectionnement, which is a performing arts certificate, takes 1 year. And I was working with Michel Bouvard over there. He's a very renowned French organist. His grandfather was a famous organist as well. And he's an expert in the field of all things French, from French classical to the romantic and modern music as well. And while I was over there, I also worked at 2 churches. I worked at the Paroisse de Saint-Exupéry, and also that's a combined parish with another close by church called Notre Dame de Lourdes. So I was playing organ for them on Sundays. And it was really fantastic. I had a great time over there and was having a wonderful year. Very challenging year in many ways. Of course, language-wise, I was always feeling so behind on my French, but I got pretty good at speaking it after living there and really making progress musically. And then, of course, I had to come home in the 11th hour back in March. And yeah, that was very scary. It was also interesting, too, the attitude in France, because Italy is, of course, France's next door neighbor. And when the news started to break about what was going on in Italy, the attitude in France was very horrified and very, they were very cautious about everything leading up to that week when I left. And anyways, that was really hard. I also, I am dating someone who lives in the UK, and we were living in a boarding house in France at the time. That's how we met. And I had to leave her at the 11th hour, and suddenly our relationship became long distance. And so that was a really, really difficult. But as we had mentioned before, it's great to have Zoom and to have ways of speaking to other people online, because it's actually allowed us to continue to be in a relationship, and we're still together. And
good for you.
Yeah. So, but that was, I mean, more or less in a nutshell, that was my experience in France. But I was just taking a great deal of organ lessons and working a lot. So, yeah.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Well, let's take a little listen to some of the work you did there in France, and we'll listen to Pierre Dumage's Tierce on Taille, which was recorded at the church of, I don't speak French, so I'm going to butcher this, Saint-Pierre Chartreuse in
Very
Toulouse.
good, yeah.
Okay, your French is great. So
I'm
this
working
is like
on it
forensic
always.
organ. I will take a little listen to this now, the Dumage Tierce on Taille. And that was the Dommage Tierce on Taille, performed by our guest today, recorded by J.J. Mitchell at the Church of Saint-Pierre Chartreuse in Toulouse, France, on the Grenzig organ. What is that instrument like, JJ?
Oh my goodness gracious. I've never quite played an instrument like that before. The Grenzing is, if we can call it that, it's been rebuilt by several people at this point, most recently in 1983 by Grenzing. But it's really rare because it is a French classical instrument that is so intact and is so true to the original. For the listeners who may not know what this means, organs from before the French Revolution or 18th century and earlier are considered very rare because most of them have been rebuilt, most notably by the organ builder Khar or other builders who've come along after. And so to get one that's really true to that old form is really rare. And one thing that was interesting about Michel Bouvard's pedagogy when I studied with him is before we would have lessons on a Khar organ or a romantic organ, the first month he dedicated to working at Saint-Pierre Chartreuse, and he wanted all of us to get the technique of working on that kind of organ first before we moved to the romantic organs, which I thought was a really good approach, because if you can play that music with the right sensitivity and understand those registrations and how those organs work, then when you get to the more advanced mechanisms that came about in the Romantic era and in later organ building, then you can really adapt with more of a well-formed sense of how these machines really work, and you can use that good technique from the old instruments on the new.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's some wonderful experience that not a lot of conservatory students here in the United States have unless they travel extensively. So that's a fabulous experience to be able to get your hands on a French classic instrument.
I've been very, very fortunate. I can't begin to tell you, so.
Yeah. And just before the break, we'll take a listen to another French piece. This is Franck, of course, the Chorale in E major, and our guest today, J.J. Mitchell, is performing on this instrument, recorded on this instrument. And this is where did you record this one? This
was live recording, and it's taken at Notre-Dame du Tour. So this is a church in Toulouse, France, that has an organ by Theodore Puget, who was a fabulous organ builder from Toulouse, where I was living and working at the time. And this organ, I think, was built in 1874. Wow.
Yeah. And now let's take a listen to J.J. Mitchell playing the Franck Chorale in E major. And after the break, we'll listen to a little bit of Duruflé. And we just listened to J.J. Mitchell, our guest today, playing a little bit of the Fugue sur le nom de l'âne of Duruflé. And before the break, we listened to some Franck, the Chorale in E major. The Franck was performed in Toulouse, so it was a live recording. And the Duruflé was here in the United States, in Virginia, correct?
That's right. The Duruflé was at St. Luke Catholic Church in McLean, Virginia, on the Steiner Rec organ there.
Yeah, I played on that many, many years ago. And Paul Scovington is still there, yes?
He's still there. Paul Scovington was my organ teacher in high school, and he is someone who was really influential on my formation as a young musician, as a teenager especially, getting me ready for all those college auditions and everything. So I learned a great deal from him.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. It's been years. He was on this program many, many years ago, but we have to get him back on again at some point. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so he was your high school teacher. So was he your first teacher on the organ?
He was my second teacher on the organ. Before Dr. Scovington, I was studying with David Lang, who at the time was also working at McLean. But yeah, Dr. Scovington was a fabulous teacher for me because he has this unique organ, the Steiner Rec, which has both a electro-pneumatic console as well as a tracker console that access the same organ, which is incredibly rare. That allowed us to work on a variety of different techniques. Mm-hmm. And also as a teacher, I think that he set a really good sort of discipline for me. And he taught me how to really listen to myself critically at a young age, how to make some adjustments, what is an appropriate bar of, I guess, adequacy for each organ lesson, which the answer to that is perfection. And he was really fantastic teacher, and I saw him over the summer, and he did really well. So
yeah, good to hear. JJ, in your studies, do you have a lot of coursework and experience with improvisation?
I do. Yeah. One of the things I was lucky to do when I was in France was I worked with Philippe Lefebvre, who is one of the organists of Notre Dame de Paris, the big Notre Dame, and he is a really renowned improviser, and he would come in and teach improvisation master classes, at Toulouse at the L'Église de Dalbad, which has another Puget organ, one of my favorite organs ever. And most of what we did, actually, we didn't start off in the French style. He would start you off on Bach chorales. He wanted to give you a Bach chorale and see that you could play it, and then he would give you a bass line, and he wanted to see that you could put a melody over that in a Baroque style. And then from there, that was the foundation on which he would build into sort of the different directions of French creativity that you could experience. And that was really great. I've also studied improvisation as well with Jason Roberts, who is an organist from New York, and he's a fabulous improviser, oh my goodness, and composer as well. He composes some really great American pieces. So getting our country's name out there when it comes to organ composition. And I also, the last person I would mention also is Dr. Stephan Young of Westminster Choir College, who taught a keyboard harmony course, and he was a student of Nadia Boulanger back in the day. And he would teach that class in that kind of a manner. And Nadia Boulanger's manner, she was a very strict teacher with her kids. She taught Philip Glass, she taught Steve Reich, and she was known as a very tough person who would want you to be good at figured bass, want you to be good at improvisation, want you to be good at all kinds of different exercises. And he taught in that same manner. So these are the people with whom I've worked on improv in the past. So
what advice would you give, JJ, for folks who, you know, here in the United States, sometimes we all feel like we're light years behind the Europeans in terms of improv. What advice would you give American organists who are really trying to improvise?
Sure. I think that the first thing is when you have a melody in front of you, let's say that you're working with a chant and you want to play a chant in a really creative way. Maybe there's an interlude in your liturgy where like after communion and between the dismissal, you need to fill in with something. Know the chant by heart first. And then once you know the chant, start thinking about what chords would go with the big notes of that chant. Like the first note, know where that is, like what key you're in, and figure out a chord that sits really well with that, and just go one at a time. But in order to really do that, you have to really know that chant line so that you can focus on the harmony you're doing underneath. And the same would go with chorale preludes as well. When Bach was improvising his chorale preludes, and then the ones that ultimately got written down that have survived, it's so evident that he knows those chorale tunes backwards and forwards. And so he's able to really make a creative thing with those. And especially like that's when you get to the really advanced levels. Like once you feel comfortable with harmonies, you can get into text painting. Like, is this a sorrowful chant or chorale tune? Is this joyous? And you can start to experiment with different characters. And so I think though that you really need to know your tunes before you get into that. You can't do sight reading and improvising of a tune at the same time when you're at least starting out. Once you get to an advanced level, maybe, but.
Yeah, good advice. And one of the tracks that you sent to me, JJ, is a spiritual lullaby. Is this your work?
This is not my work. This was written by a Black composer. His name's William B. Cooper, and he lived in the 20th century. And this is a work that actually Morningstar Publications asked me to record for them.
Okay.
And at the time that I recorded this, there were some things happening in our country with civil unrest and things that we're still dealing with right now. This was only a few months ago. Mm-hmm. And I actually thought that it was really powerful that it had just happened that this piece that Morningstar had given me was by a Black composer, and that I had the privilege to perform this music. And so I thought that this was really important to record, not just for Morningstar, but also to share on YouTube and with the internet, because I would like for people to hear music that is being produced by the African-American community, especially for Oregon. We don't have a lot of Black composers.
Right.
And I think that they deserve to have a voice. So I'm really, with great pride, sharing this recording.
Yeah, great. So let's take a listen to Spiritual Lullaby by William B. Cooper. And this is performed by our guest today, JJ Mitchell. And then after the break, we'll listen to a little bit of Carnival Overture that was transcribed by Edwin Lemare. And we just listened to a little bit of the Carnival Overture, transcribed by Edwin Lemare and performed by our guest today, J.J. Mitchell. And just before the break, we listened to the Spiritual Lullaby of William B. Cooper, which is published by Morningstar Press. That's great. Mm-hmm. And yeah, if you want to take a listen to that again, you missed it a little bit here on the radio and you want to listen to it again, you can go onto the YouTube and put in J.J. Mitchell, organist. Or do we put in J.J. Mitchell?
I think that if you put in J.J. Mitchell organ in the search bar, I think that I come up.
Okay. Good. And another one that you sent to me was Shen, Khar, Venakhi. Am I saying that correctly?
Shen, Khar, Venakhi.
And what does that mean?
It means you are a vineyard. So I'll talk a little bit about what this piece is. Mm-hmm. In 2018, I was selected by the Graduate School of Notre Dame of Sacred Music at the University of Notre Dame to go to Georgia, south of Russia, for an exchange. And I chose to do it because my professor had won this grant and I wasn't paying for much of it, if any, and it was a chance to represent the department. But to be honest with you, I had no clue what I was doing or what we were going to be doing over there. And Georgia, south of Russia, I'll give a brief overview so that you can understand what we were doing. They are an Orthodox Christian country, so they are in communion with Constantinople, and they have a very, very rich polyphonic tradition of chanting, which is also very similar to their folk tradition, which is also polyphonic. And that means essentially that every time that they go to do a chant in their church, they have three voices that are singing the chant in perfect counterpoint with one another. And we were going over there because there was a connection between my professor who had won the grant and someone who was a professor at the Chant College of Tbilisi, Georgia. And they wanted to spark this exchange because they want to have a vitalization, I think, a sharing, a rebirth of this rich chant tradition. And I went over knowing that we were going to be working on like some vocal related things. I didn't even know it was chant and folk music at the time, but I came away with an absolute zeal and inspiration for this, because I think that sometimes as Catholic Church musicians, when we're not working with our choir or with our cantors, we can get discouraged at the lack of singing sometimes in our Catholic churches. We're working on improving it always, and it's a lot better than it used to be. But in Georgia, there was so much chanting and singing, and it's just a very musical place. And I thought to myself, we've got to bring some of this here, but also not just the zeal for congregational song or choral song, but just their tunes and the way that their music is composed is very haunting, I think. And it's absolutely stunning how unique it is and how different it is from what we do in Western music. Mm-hmm. And so I've thought about ways that I can share this music with church communities here or even performing communities here. And what I've discovered is that because these are three-part chants, you can transcribe them very easily to the pipe organ, because your right hand does the top voice, your left hand the middle, and the lower voice goes to the pedal, so you have a trio. Mm-hmm. And so this is quite literally a transcribed chant from Georgia, played in the style of a trio. I'll be really brief talking about this chant. It is called Shen, Khar, Venakhi, You Are a Vineyard. When Georgia was ruled by the USSR in the 20th century, all of their sacred polyphony, this rich tradition, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of these chants, and they were all outlawed by the Soviet Union, except this one. Wow. This one they were allowed to sing, and it is the one that was sung during those really turbulent years, and it's their most popular chant there. For them, it's almost like their national anthem. Their national anthem is different, but this is a close second. And everyone knows it. And I thought to myself, this is really beautiful. And I think that this could be done really well on the organ here. And so I've made a transcription. Over the summer during my quarantine, one of my projects was to do more of these chants. And I've got one big organ work, kind of a fantasia incorporating several chants that is not finished. Yeah. And I'm trying to complete it, as well as just looking for other chants that will transcribe really nicely to the pipe organ, because I'd love to put this music out there. I think it's really prayerful, I think it's soulful, and it's something that can be used accessibly by organists of varying competence, from beginners to experts. Sure. anyway, so I just find this really exciting music that I can contribute to the field.
Well, great. Your Fantasia, so all of the chants are then Georgian chants.
Yeah, I've chosen 2 so far, both Easter chants. So this would be an organ piece for Easter, kind of postlude, I suppose, but it's not done yet. So I've got some more work to do. And also now that school is in full swing, it's always on the back burner, but I'm hoping that come this winter or maybe even later that it'll be finished. And Rome wasn't built in a day. So.
Is Shen, Khar, Venakhi published?
This piece is not published, no.
Oh, you should think about it.
Okay. I could.
Yeah, you should do that. But let's take a listen now while we're waiting for it to get published. This is J.J. Mitchell playing Shen, Khar, Venakhi, his own transcription of a Georgian chant. And that was Shen, Khar, Venakhi. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Transcribed by J.J. Mitchell, who is our guest here today on Sounds from the Spires on the Catholic channel of Sirius XM 129. Great music. You're a wonderful player. And gosh, you're so young and you just have your whole life ahead of you yet. You're going to go really far and already have gone very far. But maybe, and just a nutshell, because we only have about a minute left. I know we could have so much more to talk about. Any advice for those who are just entering conservatory life and maybe how can they deal with it during this pandemic time and moving forward? How can they find the inspiration to just keep going with their studies?
I'll be quick. So the first thing is that this is an exciting time to be in this field because everything is changing all the time. And there is a lot of opportunity if you're an organist to do a variety of different things with your career. And it's not a streamlined thing. Everyone navigates it in a different way. And so I think that it's a really cool opportunity for young people to come and do this instrument. But I think that now in 2020, specifically with the pandemic, I think that the first thing, like we all have to say, it's temporary, it's not forever. We will have singing congregations again soon. We will have live organ performances soon. Just think about this time if you're starting conservatory life or if you're looking at starting conservatory life next year or whatever. This is a growth time. This is a great time to be practicing and to be really recording yourself, especially. One thing that we're working here at University of Houston with a lot is recording of yourself. Mm-hmm. All of our studios are recorded, everything. And recording is so great for musicians because it tells you everything you need to know about yourself, where your mistakes are, what you sound like, what your strengths are. And so I would tell young people, take advantage of this time to record, carpe diem, seize the day. Don't just think, oh, I can't perform live, so I'm not going to perform. No, get to it. So anyways.
Yeah, great advice. And our guest today is JJ Mitchell, and in a few years will be Dr. JJ Mitchell. So
God willing.
Yeah, let's take a listen now to, we're going to end the show with him playing from Notre Dame University, some Bach, which is the concerto after Johann Ernst, BWV 592. But before we end, I just want to say thank you, JJ. I wish we had another few more minutes because we could certainly talk about a lot more things. And you're doing some great stuff. You play very well. And I just wish you the best of luck with your studies and keep on going. You're doing great things.
I want to thank you for having me on the show, and I want to thank you for being so supportive. It's people like you, Rick Abala, John Romeri, people who've carried the banner forward and are passing on the torch that keep me going and make this really an optimistic field for me and a place where I really see myself having a good career and give me some fuel. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And it's good to know that we have stars like you who are going to be filling all these major positions. So it's the future looks really bright. So thank you, JJ. Thank you to Robert. And we'll finish out by listening to the Bach Concerto after Johann Ernst, BWV 592, recorded at the Reyes Hall at the Notre Dame University on the Fritz organ. Thank you, JJ. Have a great week, everybody. Stay tuned next week for Sounds from the Spires on the Catholic Channel on Sirius XM 129. Have a great week.